thank you for making the time. And, and I'm excited to present these ideas to you. I'm going to be thinking about what counts as evidence. Why is it important for nonprofits to be thinking in a scientific way about evidence? Well, understanding evidence can help us with our program design and our implementation and our measurement of the effectiveness of our work. So let's think about what we call the scientific method. So the scientific method is about trusting and having confidence about things that you can see, you can hear, you can touch, you can taste, you can feel. So it's relying on our five senses as human beings to we then believe something to be true or have confidence in it because we've experienced it through our own senses. So in a very basic way, that's what we mean by the scientific method. And what it involves is these various steps. So any type of question that you want to approach from a scientific viewpoint, you would want to first observe what's happening, the problem, the situation. Then once you've made your observations, you might form an hypothesis. So that's forming an idea of, okay, that is causing that, or this is affecting that. So those relationships between different things that you've observed. Then the next step would be to figure out how you're going to test it. So in the context of our context in nonprofits, we could think of this step as our monitoring and evaluation phase. So we've got some ideas, we designed a program, and we decided these are the indicators we want to track. But our system that's in place is that of testing the hypothesis. And in seeing what the results are, we're also finding proof of whether our idea works. Then we analyze the results, we draw conclusions, and then with all scientific ways of doing things, you remain humble and open to improvement. So you always want to refine your approach and repeat, refine and repeat, and get better and better. So this is a fun sort of starting point, which I want you to, it's here to get your creative juices thinking and to give you a practical case in history of what I'm talking about. So today we all know, even if we're not scientists, that germs are invisible little things that make us sick. But people did not know that before we had the technology and ways of seeing these things. So with our eye, germs that make you sick, we can't see them. So for a long time in history, there was a theory of miasma, which is a funny word, but it means a bad smell. And people really thought that sicknesses were caused by bad smells. So the things that were rotting or decomposing matter, they would think that those things, if you got close to them, would make you sick. And people even hung dry flowers in windows in an attempt to make nice smells chase the bad smells away. But you can see that um, so this opinion held for a long time, but there was a man named, this is a practical example of someone that was thinking differently to how everyone else thought. So he was Dr. John Snow, and he didn't quite think that agree with this kind of thinking. So there were cholera outbreaks in London, and he decided to look at the problem from a scientific viewpoint. So he didn't suspect that it was the smell in certain areas which was making people sick. He thought it was the water. So he started to collect data on who was sick and where they were in the city. And what he managed to do is identify that cases of cholera were higher at certain water pumps than other water pumps. So then he confirmed his theory that he had by closing off the ones that by removing the handle on the pump, where he thought this was a contaminated water source, and then the rate of infection dropped. So that's such a powerful way of thinking of how, if we challenge the prevailing norms of our beliefs, we can get to a better understanding of a problem and actually fix it. Another example is Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch. So they were involved in further understanding germ theory. So for a long time, it wasn't necessary to treat milk because people would milk a cow and then consume it within a reasonable amount of time. But as the economy developed and people thought of selling milk commercially, it became really important to ensure that people wouldn't get sick from milk. So that's why we have pasteurized milk today, where the milk is heated to high temperature to kill any germs that might be in the milk, and then that increases the shelf life. And these two men also discovered that there were microorganisms that caused sickness or things to go off. So why am I telling you this historical story? I'm hoping to get you thinking about, are there prevailing beliefs that are widely accepted, but they might not be true, such as bad smells cause sickness? And what we can learn from it is the importance of collecting and analyzing information systematically and not necessarily believing that what everyone says is true. Being open to new ideas and ways of interpreting evidence, and understanding that evidence can dramatically change the ways we address problems. In this case, health, and understanding that it's actually tiny things we can't see with our eyes has helped us to fight disease and improve health for human beings. So in a modern application, how does this relate to your work? I want you to think, are there miasma theories in your field, widely accepted beliefs that are not supported by evidence? And how can we use evidence to challenge and improve our understanding of problems in our different spaces, whether it's education or food security or children's well-being or activism, whatever the area might be? We can think, is there a view that people are talking about, but actually everyone says that, but what's the evidence for it? So let's do a much more down-to-earth and relatable example that is relevant to nonprofits. So perhaps a nonprofit wants to look at the relationship between weather and children's outdoor activities. So the first starting point would be, perhaps we've observed that children seem more energetic on sunny days. So then we form an hypothesis or a theory that says sunny weather increases children's physical activity. How would we measure it? We could track children's activity rates by putting pedometers on their arm and see their activity on sunny versus cloudy or not ideal weather for playing outside. How would we analyze that kind of data that we collected? Then we look at the step count for the different weather conditions that we would have. And then ultimately the conclusion would be, is there a significant difference in activity levels? So we would be testing whether there's really a relationship between weather and the behavior of children in terms of outdoor exercise. Another thing to think about here, if you're going to, if you're looking at how you're going to measure your concept or your idea, or see the relationship between things, you also need to consider, do you have the resources? So in this example, it requires that you would have enough pedometers to be able to have one for each child. And if you're looking at many children, to ensure reliable information, that could be costly. So we always have to also ground what we want to do in what is practical and what we can do. Okay, so I hope that that's gotten you to start thinking about evidence and getting the creative juices flowing. Over the next few slides, I'm going to look at different types of data. So the kinds of data types that we can be collecting. So we talk of quantitative data. This is largely numerical information, numbers, and we can put these into time series, or we can put these into a variety of data sets, and then analyze the statistically the relationship between things. We could look at creating bar graphs or pie charts with our numerical data. It's fun to play with using Excel or other more advanced statistical tools, but Excel can do a lot, and I would recommend using Excel. And this kind of data you collect from surveys and questionnaires, and it's about a lot of counting of numbers. We also talk of qualitative data. So this is non-numerical information, and it provides a different source of insight into a problem or what we're trying to measure. So it's looking at it from the point of view of words and what people say about something. So the ways to get this data would be interviews. That's one-on-one interaction with a person. So how that differs from a questionnaire is that there's that two-way opportunity for a interviewee to clarify perhaps what is meant by a question, and then they can give their response more clearly, and then the interviewer captures exactly what the interviewee is saying. Another form of collecting qualitative information is to have a group of participants that are all speaking and sharing in an open space about something, and then the program's impact, how it's changed the children's activity, what they've noticed about how the children are behaving. So then that gives an opportunity for people to bounce ideas off each other, and it happens naturally in a group setting, and you get a lot of depth to the information, and you might get information that you hadn't even considered asking about and you didn't design a question for. So every kind of tool has a place depending on what kind of information you're looking at gathering. Why is this measurement so important, and why are we emphasizing it today? So last week we looked at our proposal writing and getting funding for our projects. And what we mentioned there is it's really important to showcase our success stories and what we're doing. So what's really important about measurement in this session is we want to look at measurement as a way to really see if we're making impact, if change is happening as a result of what we're doing. We want to encourage creative thinking around, are the indicators clear? Are we using the right indicators to to track our progress against our goals? And everything that goes along with it, the right questionnaires, the right approach, the right methods. We want to emphasize the importance of baseline information so that you have a place from which your journey begins. So you have a starting point, and then you can measure the changes since the baseline was established, and the importance of continuous monitoring evaluation. So always being open with that scientific mindset that you might be wrong, that it might not be the most effective approach, and being willing to adapt and learn and make improvements. So what kind of survey questions can you get? You can get open-ended questions. These are maybe a paragraph or a one-word response where a person is allowed to just give the response in whatever format they wish to. So an example would be, what challenges have you faced in accessing our services? And then a person can respond. A closed-ended question is one where the answer is set within a certain format. So provide specific quantifiable responses. An example is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how satisfied are you with our program? So then a person has to put a specific response, and then with those responses from different individuals, they are more comparable, because we have a expectation that there can only be 5 possible responses. And then it will be about the number, that the count on each response. So we've you get interviews, which is one-on-one discussions for in-depth discussion, capture the diverse perspectives. And one of the starting points of such tools is really to establish the ground the session in respect and an understanding of the interviewee or the group's concerns. They may have concerns, and us as data collectors, we need to address those concerns so that people feel safe in that space to share openly. Observations is something that we as program implementers, data collectors, and we could say scientists, we make observations ourselves. So those are our subjective viewpoints based on what we know, our education, and some of the things that we think are confident positions to hold, and then we make an observation about that. Now we look at the instruments again. So you could use, these are the types of data that you get in terms of quantitative data. So you get survey responses. These are from a structured questionnaire, and they collect numerical data a lot, but we could also think of it also, surveys and questionnaires also collect linguistic data, people's responses in words. You get databases. So now this is the first one is what we call primary data. So primary in the sense of we collected it ourselves, but you also get secondary data. So we didn't collect it, but someone else has it, and we're using that data from them. So you get existing data sources. A big example in South Africa is Statistics South Africa. That is a secondary data source. So they collect the information, but it's available for the public to use for other purposes. You get administrative data. So these are the kinds of register information, participation, a number of people that attended a workshop, enrollments, all those kind of things that maybe don't speak to the goal of the project or don't provide insight in terms of the work itself, but tell us how operationally the program is running. Now, to think about using all this. So we've covered all these different types of tools. We've covered the different types of data that you might have in terms of what form it comes in. But now I want to talk about the idea of triangulating or looking at a problem from or what you've done from different points of view. So this is a cute little picture of a plant inside a triangle. And one could imagine looking at it, walking around the table and looking at the plant from different sides of this pyramid. So the way I want you to think about triangulation is you're looking at the same thing, but you're using a different approach to looking at it. So maybe as you turn, you change your glasses to sunglasses, or you look through this, you look at this plant with another filter. So this is just a metaphor for what I mean by triangulation, where we use different types or tools to observe the same thing. So we could consider looking at our primary data that we collected on our project from a survey, but then say it's relevant to economic sort of indicators. So we were looking at employment or we were looking at jobs, then we can refer to Statistics South Africa information, or which then is a secondary data source. And that's a form of triangulation. So it doesn't always have to be 3 points. It can be 2 points, but it's looking at something from different points of view using either a different tool. In the case of one is a survey, the other is an interview, or looking at actually different data, the data we've collected and the data that someone else has collected. So it's also about the using having a qualitative measure as well as a quantitative measure, so that our two different types of data are speaking to one another, or they're giving us different aspects of what we're trying to measure. Why would we want to do this? We think that looking at something from different angles and different viewpoints improves our understanding of something. So as the expression goes, you eat an elephant piece by piece. So that gives you kind of an idea of looking at the different parts of the elephant, and that way you're understanding the bigger thing better. So it's really about making sure it's a way of testing. So we make it a response from our survey that suggests this, but then when we do focus groups or interviews, we find out that our interpretation of that data is not correct. So it increases the reliability of our findings if we have spent time looking at the problem or the impact or our work activities from different points of view. Looking at data analysis, we've now collected the data, we want to assess it. So there's statistical techniques to looking at number, if our data source is numerical in format. If it's qualitative information, so those open-ended questions, data analysis can be more time consuming there because we might need to code the responses. So the responses are certainly not they're not going to be identical because every person could put a different word or sentence in. So it requires a researcher to then look at the different types of responses and maybe see if they can group them. These responses are similar to these ones, so that looking at whether there's patterns that you can discern or there's common themes in the information. So that can be quite time consuming and statistical tools, sometimes analyzing quantitative information is a very important thing in today's world. We are bombarded with lots of reading, lots of information, WhatsApp messages, news alerts, emails, journals that we have to read, articles we have to read, and we should think about how we use diagrams and visual uh, depictions to show our data in creative ways and keep people interested. So in today's world, if we want people to be interested in our work, it's vital to have those pictures and those images that keep people's attention and help us. We're becoming a very visually focused world, and that's the way many people think. So just something to bear in mind, and how helpful it can be to telling a story with images and diagrams and graphs. Now let's consider data quality. What do we mean by that? So there's three main things, or two main things, which are validity, which is about whether it's accurate. So was it captured correctly? Reliability is, was it captured correctly, consistently? So basically, every time the survey was done, or as it went to different groups of participants, for example, the measures were done in the same way, and there's consistency in the way it's captured. We could think about ID numbers. Are they all in the right format? Is the data ready to look at? Say we want to use ID numbers to look at what's the age of people in our groups, or what's their gender. If we want to use such information to pull out that kind of information, then our data set has to be reliable. They all have to be the same length and number of digits so that we can analyze it. What are some ways that we can ensure that there's this quality in our data? So we can have clear operational definitions about things and protocols of how we collect information. We can invest in training for data collectors so that everyone is on the same page. When we design a survey, we can test it first and allow opportunities to make revisions and improvements to our survey. This is the same whether we're looking at quantitative or qualitative information. So if we've got a survey that's driven at getting numbers, we need to see if it's working functionally. And also with an interview kind of style survey, we might test it with a few people first to see if our questions are understood by our audience or our interviewees that are participating. And we might want to go back and refine our questions because maybe they're leading questions, maybe they're encouraging a certain type of response. So it's also important always to think about having neutral questions, which don't lead someone in a specific direction where we're trying to force our view on them, and get a certain response. So we want questions that allow for a truthful and informative answer. Okay, at this point, we are going to take a little bit of a break from the slides, and we're going to get some interaction going. So we're going to do some poll questions. And it'd be great if you can respond to these questions. So the first one is just a question directed at you. In your experience, which type of data do you find more challenging to collect? And you can give your response there. Then questions 2 and 3 are, one of the responses is correct and 3 of them are incorrect. So which of the following is an example of triangulation in data? Collecting only surveys to gather information, using both interviews and surveys to understand a program's impact, relying solely on administrative data for decision making, asking the same question multiple times in a single survey. Primary purpose of establishing baseline information or data. So we want to satisfy, the reason we do it is we want to satisfy donor requirements. We just have to do it. To make a final report look more comprehensive. So we're only thinking about baseline information for the end of the project, where we want to tell our story and what we did. Or we want to have a point of comparison for measuring program impact. We want to prove that the program is necessary. So instead of having looked at secondary data sources prior to inventing the project, we're now doing baseline to confirm that it's needed. So one of those responses is correct in terms of why we would want to establish baseline data. So we've got 40% participation. I would just encourage more people to please participate. We've got 53% have voted, have put their responses in. We're getting there, 66%. Would like, and at this point, I'd also like to say, if please at the end of the webinar, please take time to complete our evaluation form. It really helps us to understand our audience and understand how we design these offerings to fit your needs. So we've got 66%. If 5 more people could just vote, put your responses in. We're at 73%. If we can just cross 75%, that would be great. Wonderful. We've got 80%. So we will share the results now. Okay, so this is really cool. Okay, an equal spread of challenges in terms of collecting data. So quantitative data, there's generally more difficulty collecting qualitative data. I would agree, it requires a lot more planning and thinking about what kind of data we want. Are the questions easy to understand? So there's a lot of testing required, and there's a danger when it comes to qualitative information, and that's why we should be diligent to think more carefully about whether we are encouraging certain responses and not leaving it open to a interviewee, a respondent, giving us the kind of information that they genuinely feel, and they're not being led by our questions. I'm delighted to see that the most got the answer correct. So using both interviews and surveys to understand a program impact. So triangulation, I mean, it's a triangle, but it doesn't have to be 3 points of observation. So in this example, it's 2 points of observation. So it's a survey where you got a fixed set of responses. You can compare all those responses, and now you've done a set of interviews with a few other people that perhaps also completed the survey, but now you have an opportunity to go deeper and ask some follow-up questions. And then that way you're looking at the thing from this point of view and then from this point of view. And you're in the middle is now where you're seeing your finding because you've got 2 points of observation. So asking the same question multiple times, that can be not so helpful. And often when someone completing a survey feels like they've already said this information, and lots of the questions are seeming to speak to the same thing, it can be frustrating. And maybe I just close the survey, or I don't if it's online, and I don't want to finish it because it feels like I'm being asked the same thing over and over again in different ways. So that can be an approach perhaps to use in an interview. If you are talking about something quite sensitive, you might want to start with some opening questions to get people feeling comfortable about something that might be a sensitive topic. And then you're asking deeper and deeper questions on the same theme. But in a survey, it wouldn't be the right place to do that. And it's certainly not a form of triangulation because you have the same viewpoint. It's data that's collected from the same tool, which namely is a survey. Wonderful. The most correct answer is to create a point of comparison for measuring impact. So we established the baseline, and now we can do monitoring continuously through the implementation of our project. And that way we're collecting data and we're seeing how the data points changing. For example, the level of skills that a person has. Now we do training and various skills transfer activities, and then we see at a later point in time what their level of skill is now. So here we're looking at changes happening over time. Yes, it could be. It also could be used to prove that a program is necessary. Perhaps there wasn't a lot of data available about a problem. So when we were at our problem statement point of view, maybe the issue has been neglected, and we suspect, our observation is that this is the problem, and then we've designed a project to fix it. So in some cases, there may be a need to use baseline information to confirm the need of the project or what you want to do. So that is great. Thank you for everyone who participated in that. And I hope that we are learning through this process. Okay. So at this point, I'd like, okay, just stopping sharing. Okay. So now let's get back to some practical examples that we might think about. So now we want to have an after-school program. We want to run an after-school program. So step one might be will an after-school program improve children's academic performance? What kind of evidence might we gather for such a project? So quantitative information might be the test scores before and after a program's implementation. Qualitative information might be the feedback that we get from teachers or parents about the level of children's engagement. Step 3 might be to plan how we're going to collect this data. So we're going to do surveys among parents and teachers. We're going to have some sort of standardized test scoring. So if children are doing different subjects, can't necessarily compare different subject results to each other. So within our data set, we would have to compare apples with apples and see what the children's score results are on the same subject, for example. We could do focus groups with children, and that way gauge if there's an influence of having an after school program on academic performance. Now we want to analyze our findings. So we compare the test scores that we had pre and post, and we can see if there's any themes in terms of qualitative feedback. So I hope that practical example is helpful to thinking about actually how do we put all this theory into practice and where does it fit in? Remember, there's also, when it comes to research methodology, ethical considerations are important. In that previous example, if we're having a focus group with children, there might need to be parental supervision. Some parents else that is actually legally responsible for the well-being of the child for that duration of time. The parents themselves might want to be present, depending on what kind of things we're talking to children about. So there needs to be informed consent with anyone that's participating in an interview or survey. We need to inform people how we are going to use this data. Is it for educational purposes? Does it have more selfish reasons? For example, we just want to market our product better. We're trying to collect market research information, which people tend to be more suspicious of, because then they're thinking, well, this is not really about me, it's about you. Whereas if it's for educational purposes, that's sort of for public benefit. And if it's for tracking a program, then there's quite an honest reason to want to collect information because we want to see if we're doing a good job. We need to let people know that, for example, if we're going to use responses from people, we are going to anonymize the data and their name is not going to be attached to any particular findings. Even if they're an outlier and they have a different response, we wouldn't want to refer to them by name unless they wish to tell a testimony or something, which is and attach their name to it. But in most cases, there'd be confidentiality and anonymity. We want to have responsible data management. So these days, especially in the modern environment of the digital age, there's cyber attacks and people can access your computers and things like that. So it's important that data is stored in a responsible way, and we're not just sharing databases with everyone and their contact information, things that they might not want to be in circulation. And then cultural sensitivity, we want to be aware of the dynamics and different characteristics of the people that we are interviewing. Example coming up that's going to speak a little bit to that. So then more just a follow up to some of the ethical things that we think of. We need to also think about our own biases as individuals, as humans, and the way we think. So there's something called confirmation bias, where we are looking for the evidence that's going to prove our observation. We're not really earnest about wanting to find the truth. We just want to find data that confirms what we want to say. So that's confirmation bias. An example is in our recurring examples about children and weather and outdoors and etc. We only ask parents who like outdoor activities about children's preferences during daytime play. So there you can see we want to set it up. We want our responses to say, yes, children prefer being more active during better weather conditions. Selection bias is when we choose non-representative samples. So our sample of participants is not diverse enough. So then there is we only do measurement on sunny days, for example. Then certainly our data collected is going to show that there was, if we assume that we are correct, then the pedometer readings are going to be higher and the children were more active on sunny days, but we didn't measure activity when it was rainy or cloudy. Reporting bias is when we only report on the successes and what went well, and we ignore the negative stuff. So when there was rainy days and we were looking at our example of how active kids were, we tend to ignore that information or don't report on the fact that the level of activity dropped, and we only highlight that, oh yeah, kids were having a lot of fun on the sunny and nice warm days. So at this point, I just want to check, do we have any questions from participants? Once again, thank you for making the time. I hope that you are finding the session helpful. There's a question, how can nonprofits balance quantitative data collection with qualitative evidence, stories, case studies when demonstrating impact? That's a very good question. I think the way to balance it is to have a combination of both. So in terms of quantitative data, generally, the more you have of that, the more reliable it is. So when it comes to quantitative information, you need to have a large sample, and there are calculations for determining what kind of sample size you need for a certain population size. So remember, these might be statistical terms, but population refers to the whole thing that we're trying to measure, and then the sample is the group within that we've surveyed. So that has to be of a certain size. There is a general rule that anything under 100 is, it's been known since ancient times actually, that if you are surveying less than 100 people, the responses don't really speak to being representative of a group. So there's a 100 minimum rule where you should at least have 100 responses for a quantitative measure. And it's quite funny, sometimes you see things being advertised and the sample size was 10 people, and really from a statistical point of view, that's not significant because it was not a big enough sample of people approached to give their view on something. So it's so important to understand evidence and what human beings over time have come to appreciate as being something that you can put your confidence and trust in. And that's one example. Then back to this question, we might survey 100 people, but then we could look at 10 people for an interview. So the way to balance it is the interview is trying to speak to deeper aspects of perhaps your quantitative questions. So in the quantitative survey, you might have one of those 1 to 5 rating scales where a person rates the how they found training. But now in a qualitative kind of question, doesn't have to be an interview, it could be in the same survey. Now we give an open-ended question and we allow a response from a respondent to just say with their own words how they found a training or the benefit that they received from it. Now we can use all those collective scores of the 1 to 5, and we've got these other responses of some more depth information. So quantitative is often going wide, and it's getting a lot of responses. And then qualitative is going deep on certain points so we can get a little bit more information. So that's what I would suggest in terms of how we balance it. Thank you for that question. And then just a reminder, if as we go along, put your questions in the Q&A and any comments you have as well. Thanks. So let's move on. So in our context, in the space that nonprofits operate in, it's a very collaborative environment. Um, and we work with one another, and we work with communities, we work with other kinds of stakeholders, companies that are interested in social impact. We work with foundations, we work with local government, national government, all interested in solving problems and improving life for people. So in the context of data collection, stakeholder engagement is also important in terms of our scientific approach, because we can't do everything ourselves. I, for example, am here in the office in Johannesburg, but I need to rely on team members to collect information somewhere else outside of Gauteng, or I need to rely on an information source such as Statistics South Africa if I'm looking into trying to understand a problem that I want to put forward in a proposal that I'm writing, for example. So when it comes to this whole landscape of scientific thinking and data collection and our monitoring and evaluation, we want to be sure that everyone involved in the project of this measurement of what we're doing and seeing if we're creating impact, everyone needs to be on the same page in terms of what the program is all about. Its design, what was the need that we identified, and what are our priorities. We want to ensure that the data collection is not done irresponsibly, that there's a lot of buy-in and commitment to doing it accurately and ensuring reliability. We want to always incorporate diverse perspectives on the way we analyze it. For one person, a data point or indicator might say this, but for another person, based on their lived experience, their education, their background, they might have a totally different viewpoint in terms of what that data point or that response means for the problem and for what we're doing to address the problem. And then we should share, like we are today, through Seriti Partner, communicating ideas, communicating learnings and theory, where we each have a different strength or something to contribute within the ecosystem. So dissemination of information and then packaging it in a way that people can find useful. And I certainly hope that you're finding today useful. And I have got some links at the end of the presentation, which you'll be able to access when we share the presentation, that might be helpful for you looking at different data sources and also some resources about how you think, if you want to go into more depth about research methodology. Another important consideration when we're looking at this whole thing is also what we're doing today. So we're investing time in developing our understanding of the tools, the various kinds of ways we can collect data, surveys, interviews, focus groups. We are trying to encourage thinking about how we manage data, how we analyze it, how do we interpret it and communicate it to a wider audience. So training is a very important part, and ensuring that we understand what we're talking about when we use certain terminology, and just stimulating a culture of learning and wanting to do better. Science has driven the collection of evidence, and it's a passion for understanding the world. It's about wanting to look at the world as a series of things to be understood by the human mind, and really to just learn and learn and learn. So it's a capacity building is an important aspect. Now let's get a little bit more focused in terms of specifically monitoring and evaluation. So what does all this mean? We've been talking about different types of evidence, different types of tools, the scientific method, but let's get practical in terms of what in a nonprofit space this looks like. Unless we're doing scientific research, it would be our monitoring and evaluation framework would cover a lot of this collection of evidence and tracking and analyzing and reporting on findings. So what does this entail? We want a clear theory and logic model of of so by that I mean what are the inputs on our projects and what's our projected impact at each stage of these cycles from the inputs that we need to start towards the outcomes and the impact. We can have indicators for each one. We need to have a plan about how we're going to collect data. How frequently do we do it? Do we do it on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, a daily basis, a weekly basis? What format does that data come in? Are we using a survey, interview? And then also having a diligent process of putting all the relevant different types of data in the same places. So this is all the interview data, this is all the survey data, and then that makes it easier to compare and use your data for what you are trying to track and see whether you're making impact. So this speaks to all the mechanisms in place organizationally for ensuring reliability, credibility, you can trust your data, and ultimately the findings, you can hold a belief in the findings, which you can have confidence in, you can trust, and you can share with others. And it would be important that all these things align with your organization's goals and strategies. It's pointless doing things that are not aligned with what you want to achieve and your goal. So always think of it in a strategic way as well. What's your overarching mission and goal? And does your M&E speak to that in terms of what are you what are you hoping to achieve and how are you measuring your progress? Once again, I just want to repeat the importance of sharing information and collaboration in this space. We do not, education is certainly something that is it's a human thing that is done in groups. We learn from each other, we criticize each other, and that way we grow. So it's about having internal reports, discussions, and presentations. So we actively involved in whether what we're doing is working. We also might want to get insights from someone that works in a different division, because as we've spoken about, different perspectives can offer new innovations or ways of doing something. So perhaps we want to ask finance to look at a training report and just give their idea of whether what do they think. It's not something they're looking at it on a daily basis. They're looking at payments and they're ensuring that everything is running smoothly from an operational point of view, that trainers are going and they're traveling and all those expenses involved in that, and everything's being tracked properly in their division. But they might have something to offer to the team that's doing training in terms of whether they're doing it effectively. So it's important to share information within an organization and not sit within the silos, because everyone has something, a perspective to offer that helps us all improve collectively. Also, inter-organization collaboration is really important, because organizations have different cultures and different expertise are in this space. Some may be more scientifically driven. If we're looking at something like climate and the environment, which are very big issues at the moment. Now that requires a lot of scientific information and knowledge and understanding about weather patterns and emissions and all those kind of things. So then if we want to integrate our work into a climate dimension, say we're doing food security, but we want to ensure that in the future, these crops are not going to die because of drought, then we consider learning from someone else that has that expertise in terms of the biology of the plants and the ecology of the system. So you can see the importance of different organizations working together in networks and learning from one another. Okay, I hope that up until now, you are enjoying the process. Now we're going to get back to our really everyday kind of example, and we're going to put this M&E discussion into practice back at another example involving children. So we have a goal that we want more active, healthy kids. So what kind of indicators could we have for an outdoor after schools program? So in terms of output indicators, what is being done, this is tracking deliverables. We could look at number of children enrolled in a program, number of outdoor sessions conducted per week, the variety of activities offered. Was it sport? Was it nature walks, hiking? Was it gardening? Doing something more functional as an exercise format? How many hours were spent doing this outdoor activity per child per week? So these are all output indicators. We could look at outcome indicators. What changed as a result of doing what we did? So, was there improvement in cardiovascular fitness? Did they get enhanced motor skills, increased knowledge about, depending on, I hope it's obvious that we would have to select an indicator based on what we are able to measure. So again, here, it's a little bit of a difficult one. We might need to have a nurse that comes in and looks at cardiovascular fitness at certain points in our after school program to measure that kind of indicator. So sometimes we can have an idea, but we don't have the ability to measure it. So we also need to think in practical terms, and the indicators we select need to be relevant to both what we want to track, but what we're capable of doing. Whereas, for example, the motor skills might be something far more easy to measure, for example, catching a ball, kicking a ball, and doesn't necessarily require expertise, specialized expertise to measure that kind of outcome. What are some of the impact indicators that could come about because of an after-school outdoor program? So you might observe that over time, there's reduced childhood obesity among participating families. We could look at improved overall health indicators. So now again, we need a little bit of clinical expertise, a nurse to, or maybe a fitness trainer, an expert in biokinetics to do blood pressure and body mass index calculations to see our children at a healthy stage of development. We could look at long-term engagement in outdoor activities. So there is research that shows that when children engage in these things at an early age, they get passionate about the sports that they do, and it can lead to a lifelong passion for pursuing that. And that has, in today's world, amazing opportunities if you can actually do really well at it, if you can excel at a sport. And you're really good at it, opens doors. So it's worth investing in. It shows us that when the appreciation for the environment and nature, and this has been called a joiner mindset, where it builds into a child a lifelong sort of wish to look after nature and appreciate it. So a question to consider, just as you after this webinar and as you return to your data and look at it, is are you capturing the information on your projects that's relevant to what you're trying to measure? So in this case, are these indicators truly capturing the goal of active, healthy children? So looking at this in a little bit more depth and being a bit more critical, now we start to say, how do our indicators account for weather variations? Are we tracking indoor versus outdoor activity ratios? Do our indicators consider mental health benefits of outdoor play? Are we measuring social skills development through group activities? So, for example, if we're hiking, there are opportunities for human touch. Someone might be slipping and another person catches them by the hand. These are building other kinds of skills, not merely physical fitness and activity, or creating a fire and sitting around and doing storytelling. There might be other benefits to being outside that are not related to physical health and cardiovascular improvement. So are we looking at what we're doing holistically? Long-term impact, is there behavior change? Are we considering family involvement and in its impact? Are the parents involved in this outdoor after schools program? This is a very serious one when looking at such a topic. Are there inadvertent things that we are doing, unintended consequences? So, for example, are we encouraging over competitiveness among certain children, which then seek to outdo all the others? And that can, if it's encouraged too much, could lead to them being sort of difficult to work with other children if they're overly competitive and they only want to excel themselves. Are we thinking about inclusivity? Are we thinking about the different abilities that different children might have? And are our activities suited to including people from diverse backgrounds and abilities? Cultural relevance we would want to look at. Are the outdoors activities we're selecting, are they relevant to the group of children participating in the program? Are we considering traditional games or other activities that we could be doing to account for making the program more enjoyable in terms of people's cultural background? Are we looking at the long-term impact of in terms of the environment? Has being outdoors created more environmental awareness among children? And are we tracking any of the changes? So reflection again for you is that based on all these considerations, what changes could you think about making to your indicators if you're picking up some problems? Maybe the questions that you're currently using, you can put a red flag on them because maybe something has prompted your thinking. Either they're not measuring the right thing, or they may have unintended consequences of what you're trying to measure. And in this examples, ultimately the goal is to have healthy, active children. Are the measures that we measuring, or the indicators we're measuring, meeting that goal? So in conclusion, we've looked at understanding the nature of evidence and why it's critical for effective program design and implementation. I hope you've understood and gained a deeper appreciation for how important data and evidence is. We've looked at the different kinds of tools, qualitative, quantitative, or the different types of data, qualitative and quantitative. And we've also looked at different kinds of tools for how to gather them. And we've emphasized how important it is to have continuous improvement, learning, assessment. So these are some key takeaways, very high level summary. So evidence types, we get quantitative, which is numerical or it's measurable data. So it can be words, but we can also measure it. Qualitative is non-numerical and it provides descriptive insights. Why is measurement important? It's crucial for understanding program impact. It establishes clear indicators and baselines. Different kinds of methods we can use is surveys, interviews, focus groups, observations. Each method has unique strengths and applications. Triangulation is combining multiple data sources for a more comprehensive understanding. Remember, we were looking at the plant inside the triangle from different points of view, or whatever we are looking at, we're looking at it from this viewpoint and then from this viewpoint, and in the middle, we're seeing a better understanding of what we're trying to measure. And then I hope we appreciate the importance of the quality of our data, so that all the data we are gathering is valid, it was captured correctly, it's reliable, we can trust it, and we have clear protocols in place, and also scheduled quality checks where say there's a survey out there, it's online, we're receiving responses all the time. We might want to set up periodic checks where perhaps once a week we just check, or twice a week, depending on what kind of frequency is required. We would want to check, is the data coming through in a way that is usable, or do we need to change something quickly because it's coming in a way it's all jumbled, it's not the right format, it needs to be cleaned extensively before being used. So then those quality checks ensure efficiency in our process and ultimately help us at the end of the day when it comes time to analyzing it and learning from what the data is saying. I hope you've also gained an appreciation for how important it is to consider ethics, protecting privacy and confidentiality, and ensuring that those that participate in our surveys and interviews understand how the data is being used and why we're asking those questions. The importance of speaking about this topic within our stakeholder ecosystem, and we have collective buy-in. I hope you've gained an exciting and passionate feeling for the scientific method and how it can transform our thinking and really help us not necessarily always believe the status quo or an accepted idea about something, but being open to challenging our beliefs and to looking if there's something that's deeper, there's another cause of the problem, or there's a better way to fix the problem. Want a culture of continuous measurement and evaluation and thinking about improvement and learning. And this is all about wishing to run our programs better and have enhanced impact. And we want to think about collaborating both within and with outside our organizations and share the best practices, the learnings, what's working, what's not working. And Seriti has a platform called Seriti Talks, where that's an opportunity for us to share about our projects and things we're doing and learning. And we also invite other organizations to speak to their projects. And that's one example of a kind of platform that allows us to share knowledge and understanding of our relevant projects. Today's session has been about a lot of the theory behind research methodology and trying to understand the technical aspects of evidence. But on our Seriti Talks program, we have lots of opportunities where we're looking at in depth the kind of findings we're getting, and the also inviting partners to speak about how their programs are going. So I hope that you keep a watch on our social media, our website, and sign up for those opportunities when they come about, when we're going to host one soon.